Try one more time. I
just wanted to watch you struggle.
Me or him? Or you just anybody?
No,
It didn't matter.
You seemed okay.
Okay.
He's got to say something for me.
All right, I think we're back. Okay. Tell me if that pops up. All right, just real quick for the recording. Today we're going to review CRUD, and then we're going to talk about nested CRUD. And so we were talking before that CRUD is, what was I saying? It's a list of features that we want our app to offer. And what it is, it's a list of features that it's not like someone invented CRUD and then someone was like, cool, now the internet is going to do a bunch of CRUD apps. It was complete opposite, right? People were making apps for the internet, and or just making apps, and they were doing the same thing over and over so many times that they, as programmers do, recognize that there's a pattern to this, right? And there's a pattern kind of underneath most of what we're doing. And it is this list of 4 basic features. We're allowing users to create things in our database. We're allowing them to read things out of the database, update those rows in the database, and then delete them. So it's these 4 things that they decided, right? So now once it became clear like that there's this pattern of things that we're doing, then people started to think like, okay, well, what is the most efficient way? And from there, some like standards started to develop, right? Now you've seen like Django's pretty adaptable. So you can kind of make Django work any way you want. So you're not always gonna need to stick 100% to this like CRUD idea, but it's a really good jumping off point, and it's a great model for the way a lot of things work, right? I kind of think of it now because I used to be a writing teacher. Did anybody do 5-paragraph essays way back in grade school, right? And remember, a 5-paragraph essay was like 5 paragraphs. I have an intro paragraph, and in there is a thesis where I bring up my 3 main points. Then I have 3 paragraphs that are my 3 main points. Tacos are great because they're easy to eat. Tacos are also great because they're cheap. Tacos are also great because they're delicious, right? And then in conclusion, tacos are great because they're easy to eat, delicious, and right? We all have this 5-paragraph essay, and we know when we're learning to write, that's a super helpful guide, right? But then when we go out into the real world and we actually have to do some writing, or if you went to college and you had to write essays for that, and you handed your writing instructor a 5-paragraph essay, they would be like, you got to grow beyond this, right? And so I'm pointing that out, like CRUD, it's not the same, it's kind of the 5-paragraph essay, right? It's a really great model to get started, but as you start asking your app to solve real world problems, you're gonna start having to break some of these rules a little bit. So I just want that in the back of your head. We're gonna continue to write 5-paragraph essays for the rest of this week, right, or for today. But just have it in the back of your head that when you start doing your personal project and you're like, oh, I have this idea, in order to get it work, I gotta break this CRUD thing, that's fine, right? That you're gonna have to. This is not gonna solve every problem, but this is such a great skeleton for things. That's why it's so important to learn it. Does that kind of make sense? Okay. So I wanna do a real quick review of what CRUD looks like as far as like the code you write. So I just wanna do, let's do C, R, U, E, right? And so this first one, and actually, we're gonna do them out of order, okay? So let's start with R. R is read. And what I want us to start translating this in our head as is, what does this mean as far as the routes I need to create? So let's just think about that. Because CRUD, these actions can be translated into routes that we need to write. And we know from before that the pattern is I write the route, then what's the next thing? Where do I jump next? Like once the user hits the route, where does that put them? What? Well, that's the route. Yeah. So so we write the URL. Oh. No, you're right. So we write the URL, which is the route. Then we move to the function that we're going to use in the views. Yeah, which is the controller. But Django calls it the views. Then we move from the views where? To the template, right? And then that's what we send back. So let's just start with the route. What route do I need? So reading traditionally, and again, this is not all going to solve all your problems, but traditionally, when we read, we can read in 2 ways. So the one is I'll usually have a route to like slash. Sometimes it's called index. And a route to slash is going to allow me to read like all rows. So a route to slash lets me read all the rows in the database. And that usually just gives me a huge list, right? And it's probably not all the information. It's probably like just the names or a couple of things about it, but I get a huge list. The other way I read is by row, and that's usually slash ID, right? This is actually a number. This will be a variable, right? So like the ID of the row I want, and that'll give me like a row. And so when I get a row, that's usually like a more robust view. Sometimes we call this the show. So this is index, and then there's show. And show is like, just give me one user and all their information, or just give me one, like I might have a list of all the posts with their titles, then I click on one, and that brings me, the route brings me to the ID of the row in the database, and then I can see the whole post, right? And all like the details about it. So far, so good. Actually, I think Django actually calls this the detail. So that's fine. Cool, we clear on the read. So read's pretty simple, right? Because I just make a request to slash, and I get all my rows, or slash index, or slash list. Might be how, does Django do list? I think it does list. It doesn't matter. You can write this any way you want. You can write this any way. It doesn't matter. The concept is I get all the rows, right? And so go ahead.
Sorry, just to
no, please.
translate this into what we've been doing.
Yes.
So the index would be all of the blog posts, right?
Yep.
And then the detail is click on one specific blog post.
And exactly. And see that one specific blog post, maybe with more information, or the whole post instead of just the title. Yeah. So these are easier because we're just making GET requests, right? And what's the difference between GET and POST real quick? Because we're going to talk about them for the rest of the time.
Add something to that.
POST is I want to add something to the database. GET is just get me something, right? So here, so these are both GET requests. Cool. So as we continue to do this, these are the only two things I want to talk about. We'll fill out the rest of this. Routes and method. Routes and type of request, right? So read is the easiest, I think. It's just one route, a GET request to slash, I return all the rows. Cool. Let's go over here to create now. So I want to make stuff in the database. This also requires two different routes. Whenever I want to make something in the database, I need two routes, right? Because I need to first, the user needs to request a form from me, and I need to return that form to them. Then they fill the form out, and they send the form, and that has all the information. That's when I actually save something in the database, right? So this is usually a, this would be like slash new is usually what you would get. And this, before here, it'd be like posts, right? Posts, here it'd be like posts slash would get me all of them. Post slash ID would get me one post. Over here, I'm going to do post slash new or post slash create, whatever you want to do. But the point is this returns a form. And this is also a GET request. I'm sorry, I know this is kind of sloppy. So I make a GET request to slash new, that returns the form. That's step one of creating something in the database. Step two is actually the form gets sent. So that's actually posts slash, I guess in Django they use, so in Django it's weird because they use the same thing. So let's just stick with that. It would be post slash new still, but the difference, the big difference is this is a post request, right? So if I make a GET request to post slash new, I return an empty form to the user. If that form, when they click submit, that form is already set up so that it automatically will make the post request, not a GET request, a post request, to the same route. And if I get that, if I receive that request on the Django side and I see it's a post and it's a form with a bunch of data, then we save that data and then we usually redirect. And you can redirect them anywhere, but a common pattern is to redirect them to the actual post that they just made. Is this clear that when we create something, we actually need two routes to do it? And it's a two-step process. Send them the form, then after they fill out the form, save the data. Questions about this one? Cool. Update is the same exact thing, right? Update is I make a GET to slash update. The only difference here is I return a form with data. So I return a form that's already filled out with the data, right? You've probably seen this, like if you update your account, like your bank account or any account, and you click update, it's gonna show you the form, probably the same form you filled out when you created your account, but it's already gonna have all your information in it. And then you can edit it from there, right? And then it's the same thing when it comes back and it's a post to /update, we just save and then we redirect. And we can redirect them anywhere. It depends on where we want them to go next, right? Delete's the last one. Delete's easy, probably the easiest one. It's just a post to /delete. And then usually / the ID, because we need to know what row to delete, right? So we're just passing this information. Cool. Questions about this CRUD stuff? How are we feeling about it?
My question. When you're like creating and updating, the post method is handled by the server, right? Well, what I'm trying to say. So the client makes the GET request for the form, right? And then the server will already send the form with the post request. Well, we will send the form with the post request already.
Yeah, we'll send a form, and the form will already be set up to, when it's submitted, it will automatically make a post request. We can take a look at this in the code to confirm that. And Django builds a lot of this, because we saw that Django has that class form. So Django does a lot of this stuff for us, which is cool once we know what it's doing, but it can be a little frustrating when we're just learning. So we can take a little bit deeper look at how the form stuff works. One thing I forgot too is when we do update, we also need an ID, because we need to know what row we want to update. It is a put. It should be a put, but Django does not deal with put and delete methods. Remember, we had that big argument, right? And that is true. This should be a put. This should be
Django
put.
doesn't do put or delete.
No.
Okay.
And this should actually be deleted.
Or they're all just posts.
Yeah. There are things you can. I think there's a framework that we're going to be working. Like it's something that sits on top of Django. We'll work with it next week, maybe, or in a couple weeks. Called Django REST, and it'll build a lot of these routes for you. And it's pretty nice, but it's like a whole nother learning curve, and it's not going to make any sense to you if you don't know this on our own. But yeah, traditionally this is a put and this is a delete. Put just means I want to update something, and delete is self-explanatory. Cool.
Okay, so
Go for it.
when you use put, I guess what would be the difference? I'm just guessing. What would be the difference from in post? I guess if you don't use put and you want to update something, that could confuse a database because it is assuming you're going to start something new when you write the word post.
Yeah.
Right?
So it's not going to not really the database. This is never really going to get all the way to the database, but yeah, that idea is correct. Like we just want like clear language about what we're trying to accomplish. And this put, delete, post, and get, they all come from the HTTP protocol, right? So someone wrote this protocol, and again, we could send stuff back and forth over like a TCP connection without doing the HTTP protocol. But if we don't follow this protocol, then we're not assuming. Then we can't assume what we're getting back and forth, right? So really, it's just kind of a word that describes what we want to do. I feel like I made it more confusing. Sorry. Are you gonna please ask a clarifying question?
Yes.
I don't know if it's going to be a clarifying question. Okay, because we were talking about this, like deleting with a delete HTTP request, and then but Django doesn't like that. It doesn't.
No.
It doesn't like it.
Not by
They
default.
won't do it off.
No.
No, yeah.
So we're deleting with, we're doing all of CRUD with post request. Or
Right.
We get HTTP or like.
Hold on, 1% at a time. We're doing all of CRUD with a post request. Keep
Yeah.
going.
But with other frameworks, you actually use the proper protocols.
So like you're just gonna go with what the framework once because that's going to be your routing system. So like that's just a string that you're sending in HTTP.
Yeah.
Like in the server, it's just how you parse that string. So it's not going to get anywhere near the database if it's wrong. It's going to be like, oh, well, 404 or something. Like I can even find this request that it's not in my list. So we'll
It's
just
how it's parsing, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
So like when we parsed that first, when we wrote that HTTP server ourselves and we parsed it like the URI and the whatever, like normally, well, I guess with other things that aren't Django,
Right.
it'll grab the second grabs get, it'll grab post, it'll grab
Django
put and delete.
Yes.
But Django doesn't. It grabs a
Django will be like, oh, I don't like it.
Yeah, Django just looks for that post.
Exactly.
Got it.
Exactly.
I think
Yeah.
It seemed like the bigger problem when it was explained to me is like, this works for our app, but if we start doing more complicated things where our app deals with other apps out there on the internet, they expect us to be following the proper HTTP protocol. If not, then things get tricky.
For sure, for sure. And this is a thing that you'll encounter, like, depending on, and it's all depending on what you're, if you're building an app for yourself or just something internal, and really you're just returning views and you're the only person really interacting with your Django on the back-end part, then this won't be an issue. But if you're trying to write an open API that you want other systems to be able to access, that's where like having these standards is super important. And it'll be a combination. Like when you work with other APIs, you'll see you can rely on a lot of this, but they'll also have documentation. That'll be very, very clear about like, this is how you need to make the request, format your request to get the information from me, right? But it would be madness if there was some common ground that we could at least point to, right? So it's not perfect, and there are ways around it because there's nothing like super enforcing this. You can make these things work other ways, but we stick to this so that we have this some common ground. Do you have a question?
You kind of just.
Oh, okay, cool.
So was Dan really upset with the delete thing because he didn't know that Django didn't understand the posting then? Is that
I think we posted something in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think Dan did Rails, and Rails is super strict about what it wants and where it will send you, depending on the request. No.
Yeah.
I mean, I could totally see that too coming from Rails, and Rails is different too because Django has some things that we need to do to get it to work. Rails is even more opinionated. Rails is like, you have to name this like this. If you don't name it like this, I won't work. If you don't route me this way, I won't work. Like, it's very, very opinionated. Django allows us some more breathing room, which again, it's, one trade-off for another, right? Cool. Other question?
Actually, I guess I will.
Yeah, go for it.
So is there a way to tell Django, like, no, I want to do it this way? Like, I know you don't want to look for this, but, so like, I don't know.
Do it over.
Yeah, like you said earlier that for our apps that we're going to be making for ourselves, for example, like you're going to have to rewrite the rules a little bit. Is there a way to tell Django to do something that stock Django doesn't want to do?
I'm sure there is, and like I said, I think that if you use that REST framework, which is a library that you download that kind of sits on top of Django, I think that does stuff where it overwrites, where you can use delete and post. I don't really know technically how deep into the Django code, or like at what point in the process you have to grab the request and overwrite it to figure out if it's put or delete. But you can do, that people do that stuff all the time. Okay, yeah. But I couldn't get into the specifics of it right now. I don't really have any idea. Cool. All right, cool. So this is CRUD. I'm gonna erase this now. And let's look at some actual code. Which I'm not set up for. Hold on.